PS1 has been considered a launching pad for a lot of franchises, with games like Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, and even Persona all starting life on the original PlayStation. However, there are plenty of games that were released on PS1 that deserve some kind of sequel or follow-up, but never did. So look, there is one game that does deserve to be on here, but isn't. That's Vagrant Story. But also, I've talked about this game more than, Square has in 20 years, so let's change the story for at least 3 more weeks. I'm Jimmy for Culture Vultures, and these are the PS1 games that deserve sequels. The PS1 was awash with beat-em-ups or shoot-em-ups that followed the same basic pattern of enter room, kill everything, repeat, and I love it for that. Fundamentally speaking, is Silent Bomber any different? Not really, as you're still clearing room after room of bad guys until the credits roll, but instead of using guns or fists to get the job done, you're dropping bombs on your enemies like Rabbit in 8 Mile. Mum Spaghetti is unfortunately not an unlockable weapon though. You control Jutar, who must bomb their way through the defences of the spaceship Dante as the ship is threatening his home planet of Hornet. Apparently, the only way to stop a planet-wide explosion that could wipe out the entirety of Hornet is not to never release the sequel, but it's instead by setting off a series of small explosions on a spaceship. What stops Silent Bomber from becoming a mindless series of explosions is the fact that the player has complete control on when they detonate their bombs. Naturally, this means you can chain your explosions together to deal a wide amount of damage or stick all your available bombs on one target to maximise the level of damage dealt in one area. You can also find E-chips throughout the game's 40 levels to give your bombs neat upgrades. Shoot-em-ups and beat-em-ups obviously would continue long after Silent Bomber launched on PS1, so the fact that this game didn't get another chance to do things in its own way is quite the shame. It really could have built on its own legend. So yeah, I've wittered on a lot in the past about how many RPGs the PS1 had, largely from Square or Enix, so it's not surprising that Sony and Japan Studio decided to have a go themselves back in the day. The result was The Legend of Dragoon, a turn-based RPG with some real-time battle elements. The game follows Dart, who's gathering a party of characters in order to stop the destruction of the entire world. So yeah, as RPG premises go, The Legend of Dragoon is fairly generic, but it's the impressive CGI cutscenes and approach to gameplay that allowed the game to sell over 1 million copies worldwide on the PS1, despite heavy competition from the likes of Final Fantasy. The Legend of Dragoon uses a pretty standard turn-based combat system, but with the added benefit of something called additions. During every attack you can tack on additions to your damage by succeeding in timed button press minigames, with the player able to add more as the game progresses. In later moments though, enemies are even able to counter your additions, forcing you to change your button input and strategy. These days, most turn-based RPGs feature some kind of real-time element or minigame to keep players engaged during the combat, making The Legend of Dragoon quite a forward-thinking game at the time. Perhaps a sequel to this from Sony, or just a large-scale remake of some kind, would make for a nice bit of diversity in PlayStation's exclusives catalogue, which makes it all the biggest shame and massive silly oversight that they'd shut a Japan studio in 2021. It's like snatchering defeat from the jaws of victory, that.
Seed? Just where do you get off whining and dining yourself at our expense?
I'm sorry, Chief. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Alright, so yes, I might be cheating a little bit in calling Snatcher a PS1 game, considering the title originated on the PC-8801 and MSX2 back in 1988 before being ported to the PS1 over 8 years later in 1996, but the fact remains that Snatcher's lack of sequel is kind of baffling. Is that because creator Hideo Kojima, along with publisher Konami, found massive amounts of success with the Metal Gear Solid series not long after Snatcher's third re-release, so chose to follow the money instead? Yes, that's more than likely and fair enough, even though Snatcher has been widely regarded as some of Kojima's best work. The fact that there was no follow-up between 1996 and the very public bust-up between Konami and Kojima in 2015 is shocking, because now we'll never get anything beyond a prequel radio drama. Interesting tidbit, Snatcher actually has a few nods to Metal Gear and vice versa too. You can watch more on that in our 100 PS1 facts video. There's 99 more of those bad boys. A precursor to the visual novel games, Snatcher is like a cross between Blade Runner and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. As you control Gillian Seed, you're part of a police force in Neo-Kobe City designed to hunt down Snatchers, which are robbers that have killed people and assumed their place in society. Gillian is an amnesiac unsure of his own history, but he knows it's got something to do with those gosh darn Snatchers. Players move around the world and interact with characters via a series of text commands, though there are a few action sequences thrown in where you get to shoot some hostile Snatcherinos. Again, a sequel to this is nearly impossible at this point, but if Blade Runner could get a sequel despite never being a huge commercial success, maybe Snatcher could too. Maybe. I will be pretty cross if it doesn't. Trying to escape the shadow of your previous game is certainly tricky, but that's especially true when that previous game is Chrono Trigger, one of the most beloved and celebrated RPGs of all time. And well, one of the most celebrated games of all time, really. Even the absolute best of follow-ups will struggle to get as much love as Chrono Trigger has over the years, and while Chrono Cross is still an incredible RPG in its own right, it never quite got the recognition that Trigger has over the years. While arguably smaller in scope, given that Chrono Cross deals with just one alternate dimension instead of hopping through several different time periods, Chrono Cross continues on the tail of Chrono Trigger while following a new cast of characters and stakes. Players control Surge, a 17-year-old boy from the village of Arnie who, through some weird mystical nonsense, is transported into an alternate dimension where he actually drowned 10 years earlier. With a mystery to solve, and not one involving the kombucha mushroom people, but who could believe you, Surge meets a wide array of characters while being pursued by an anthropomorphic panther that's strangely called Lynx. You don't need to be David Attenborough to know that a panther is not a lynx, so why did they get the cat names mixed up? Well, that's because of the dual dimensions, where players can often find two different versions of the same character, and even have those versions meet each other. There's even a New Game Plus mode to allow players to accumulate the full party of 45 characters, as it's impossible to gather everyone in one run, which is admittedly a kinda annoying design decision, but a sequel would tighten that up, right? Which makes it all the more of a shame that this was the last entry in the Chrono series, though it's not like there was an effort spent to make a third game, with a trademark for Chrono Break going live in 2001. 45 years ago. Question time. Who is this in Chrono Cross? Drop your answer down below and you could win a free Steam key for free. You'd think that a game made by some of the parties involved in the creation of the Earthworm Jim series would have been given a second chance to shine, but unfortunately for those who loved Wild 9, that never came to pass. Maybe that has something to do with the absolutely ludicrous names of some of the characters you encounter in this madcap adventure, from main character Wex Major to his motley crew of fellow adventurers that includes the likes of Pocket, Boomer McTwist, and Angus. The B is silent, apparently. What's your Wild 9 name? Mine is John James Gunjam Jr. Like Earthworm Jim before it, Wild 9 is a run and gun affair with combat and platforming taking place on a 2D plane, but instead of shooting everyone in sight until the credits roll, Wild 9 has a pretty damn cool gimmick actually. Wex Major finds himself equipped with a weapon known as the Rig, which sends out an electrical beam that allows Wex to essentially carry and throw enemies into various obstacles and hazards. Wild 9's marketing lent into the sadistic aspect of it, giving the game the tagline of torture your enemies, so if you wanted some platforming action that gives you the same mean thrills that a Mortal Kombat fatality gives you, Wild 9 was a pretty solid pick. Plus, it means you didn't have to play MK Mythology Sub-Zero, which is always a bonus. Reviews for Wild 9 were solid enough, but Wild 9 launched in the West a few months after the first Klonoa, which had a similar idea of using enemies to solve puzzles and platforming challenges. Klonoa fared way better critically, which perhaps meant Wild 9 struggled to get out of the starting blocks, but the ideas, character designs, and humour in the game could have been fleshed out further. You might think I'm a bit wild for this next game though. No, look, wait, for real, the actual idea here isn't bad, just the game itself is bad and playing it makes you feel bad. Star Wars Masters of Terrascasi was a 3D fighting game that saw a bunch of recognisable faces from the films, along with a few original characters and a couple of random jobbers gathering together to have a big old scrap. Perhaps one of the more blatant attempts to cash in on the success of Tekken on the PS1, with Terrascasi translating in Finnish to Steel Hand. Come on, that's a reference to Tekken's Iron Fist. MOTK even featured similar UI elements to Tekken. Masters of Terrascasi was considered a pale imitation though, as the sluggish pace of the gameplay couldn't hold a candle to the lightning fast action of Tekken or even Virtua Fighter. Reviews of Masters of Terrascasi would reflect that negative sentiment, and while sales for the game weren't terrible, it clearly wasn't enough to warrant a sequel of some kind. However, LucasArts were clearly onto something, as the idea of a Star Wars fighting game holds a lot of merit. Hell, even Yoda and Darth Vader were featured as DLC characters in Soul Calibur 4, and they were both pretty fun to play, so there's a good chance some can take the Terrascasi ball and run with it. Maybe the best solution would be to follow a Bushido Blade style route and have players able to chop off limbs in that, earning kills with proper strikes to the body. How force powers would factor into it is anyone's guess. We just think it's a neat idea, and by we, I mean me. I am executing my creative control, brother. Perhaps the game that came closest to receiving a sequel in this video, and also the game that might even get a sequel at some point in the future. Hogs of War was something of a European cultural phenomenon when it launched on the PS1 in the year 2000. If you didn't get to play the demo for this when you were young, your childhood may have been incomplete. Essentially a worms-inspired send-up of the First World War, replacing all of the humans for pigs and pig-related puns, teams take turns moving a single member of their squad around the map, using a variety of weapons and tools against the opponent. While the arsenal on offer doesn't quite match the level of silliness that Worms' Concrete Donkey and Holy Hand Grenade did, the voice acting from comedy legend Rick Mayall and Mark Silk help ensure that Hogs of War is just as funny as Worms. And that might help explain why Hogs of War was quite the hit in Europe, but it's been noted by lead programmer Jacob Habgood when speaking to Retro Gamer that Hogs of War never managed to sell well in America. Infogrames did try to get a sequel going in 2008, which would have launched on the PS2. Bizarrely, but Infogrames were going through dire financial straits at the time, and it's possible that Hogs of War 2 was their break glass in case of emergency plan. It was too little too late though, as Infogrames would rebrand as Atari SA in 2009 and experience even more money woes for the next decade. Fair play to Atari though, as you know, they're not setting the world alight, but they do seem to be on a bit of a comeback tour at the minute. Slightly. Meanwhile, an official remaster, Hogs of War Lord Cure, is set to land on PlayStation and PC at some point in the future, so let loose the Hogs of War once again. Cowards. Another 3D fighting game, Evil Zone, was ahead of the curve in quite a few ways. So yeah, sure, the home ports of games like Street Fighter and Tekken would feature cutscenes and endings for each character, but Evil Zone went a step further with full anime sequences narrated with full voice acting by each character. Evil Zone was designed to be an anime fighting game years before the likes of Dragon Ball Z Budokai or Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm. Both of those series have had 9 new games in the time it's taken to say this sentence. Was Evil Zone a good fighting game though? Well, reviews will suggest, not really, but there was definitely something to the formula of Evil Zone that could have been explored in follow-up games. The story follows a powerful being that's been locked away in a dimension known as the Evil Zone. Because it exists across all dimensions and is a threat to them all, a tournament is held to determine who will be strong enough to take down this threat once and for all. The game features 10 playable characters, each with their own moves and abilities, but what separates Evil Zone from other fighting games is the fact that most of the attacks are ranged. Players can get up close and personal to land some grapple attacks, but for the most part you're lobbing projectiles and hoping you don't get hit. Again, it's hardly the greatest game ever made for the PS1, but its storytelling approach to fighting games would have been appreciated a lot more in the modern era, so a sequel developing its ideas could have gone somewhere. Or, you know, it could have flopped. We'll never know. Anyway, next game. At first glance, Rapid Reload looks and plays like your bug standard clone of Contra or Metal Slug, with reviews at the time even comparing the game unfavourably to treasure games like Gunstar Heroes. Oh no, my game's like one of the most charming games ever made, oh dear. On closer inspection though, you'll find that Rapid Reload does take inspiration from other brilliant shoot-em-ups released at the same time, attempting to create something that feels like the best of everything. If you're looking for one of the PS1's many hidden gems, a cheap plug, consider Rapid Reload among their number. Offering the choice between characters Axel and Ruka across the game's 6 levels, you control treasure hunters on a quest to find a legendary stone known as the Valkyrie, running afoul of a terrorist organisation known as the Pumpkinheads. No, not that cutie in the process. With a selection of 4 weapons for each character, you'll tear a path through the Pumpkinhead forces, while using other tools like a grappling hook to manoeuvre across the levels or obtain a better position for blasting people in the face. Rapid Reload could have had more of a chance of succeeding, but perhaps due to a supposed mandate from then Sony US President Bernie Stolar about not selling 2D games in the region, Rapid Reload didn't see a full worldwide release, and it never officially came to America. You guys see the sun more than 5 minutes per decade, but we got this PS1 game in Europe. Who wins, really? I love games where you can play as a cool robot of some kind. I mean... yeah, so it's a shame that Future Cop LAPD never got the love it really deserved. Granted, yeah, the game did receive a healthy smattering of positive reviews upon launch, with many praising the gameplay and abilities that Future Cop had to offer. Originally conceived as the next installment in the Strike series, joining games like Desert, Jungle and Urban Strike, Future Cop LAPD leans more towards the bombastic, producing something that feels like Demolition Man crossed with RoboCop. It's 2098 and the crime war has taken over Los Angeles, so the police are forced to deploy the X1 Alpha, a transforming robot that's able to switch from a fast-moving pursuit vehicle to a bipedal mecha complete with an arsenal of weapons. That does sound pretty neat, however, I'm still thinking about the crime war, which suggests people are doing crimes to see who comes out on top. Would there be a point system? 5 points for jaywalking, 50 for moida, 100 for making Lost in Space or something? Interestingly though, Future Cop LAPD has 2 main modes, with the Crime War mode functioning as the story campaign as you move from district to district trying to liberate Los Angeles from the chokehold of the gangs. That's all well and neat, however the Precinct Assault mode is where Future Cop LAPD gets really interesting, as it's been considered by some to be the start of the MOBA genre. The fact that Future Cop LAPD's legacy has arguably spawned an entire genre, but the game itself can't get a damn sequel, is pretty sad honestly. I'd cop a sequel to this in the future. Los Angeles, Lakers, that's baseball, right? So yeah, what do you think of those lights? It does red as well. But more importantly, what do you think of this sick t-shirt? Democracy Manifest. Will actually got me this for my birthday. So to celebrate my birthday, which was 2 months ago, go down in the comments and comment, I see you know your judo well, and you could win a free Steam key for free. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. It's been good to have you, and thank you for doing the Zorro here. Watch it. I missed. There you go. Watch it.